Picture Egypt without pyramids or gold. Picture crowded homes, smoky ovens, and tired workers. Life was harsh, but people had clever ways to make it run. From brewing beer to sharing rations, their daily hacks built a civilization. And so, in today's episode, we'll explore the lost Egyptian world and the daily life tricks that made Egypt prosper. And to see how Egypt really worked, we have to start at the table. Egyptian bakers ground emmer wheat on stone querns. The flour was full of chaff and sand. So they sifted it. Unless they liked crunchy bread, dough was left to ferment, sometimes with malt or wild yeast. It could be shaped by hand or poured into clay molds. Early ovens were pots or small mud brick kilns. By the New Kingdom, they had tall clay ovens with thick walls. Tomb paintings and real loaves show bread with coriander, dates, or cracked grain baked inside. Beer came later, starting in the Middle Kingdom. It was made from barley, sometimes emmer. Grain was sprouted for enzymes, then cooked, then mixed with raw malt in water. The mash was strained, and the husks were removed. The sweet liquid remained. Yeast did the rest. Sometimes, bakers made beer loaves, which were half-baked bread full of yeast. They crumbled these in water and let them bubble into beer. The drink was cloudy and full of sediment. But it was safer than river water. Fermentation killed off most of the things that tried to kill you. They also flavored it with dates, herbs, or spices when plain yeast water wasn't enough. As for fish and meat, they were dried and salted. Sometimes they were soaked in brine, sometimes sealed in fat or oil. Storage jars were sealed with resin or pitch to guard grain and oil. Honey never spoiled, so it was common in tombs. Figs and dates were sometimes glazed in honey or beeswax to keep them fresh. Cooking was simple, but clever. Meat or bread could bake on hot stones and finish in steam. Clay pots sat half-buried in embers, lidded pots and clay. Beehive ovens trapped heat for slow cooking. Some women buried bowls of grain in embers, turning them into porridge or beer mash. It's not much different from today's set-it-and-forget-it meals. And as for water, it came from canals and wells, and it was left to settle overnight in jars. Some pitchers had sand filters built in. Texts mention boiling or tossing in a handful of charcoal or sand, but most people just drank beer. Beer, after all, was safer, and frankly, more fun. But food was only half the battle. Staying clean in ancient Egypt was a whole other story. Egyptians found that natron, a salty mineral, could clean cloth and skin. Laundry was soaked in natron water, rinsed, and then dried in the sun. Its alkaline bite also worked like soap, sometimes mixed with ash. The same natron used for mummies also scrubbed shirts. Men and women lined their eyes with kohl. Black came from galena, while green came from malachite. It looked sharp, it cut glare, and it may have fought infection. The Ebers Papyrus lists honey, oils, and plant extracts for skin and scalp care. Massage oils from almond, castor, or sesame were scented with flowers and resin. For lice, texts suggest vinegar or plant pastes. Basically, this was the world's oldest anti-dandruff aisle. Medical papyri show a mix of home remedies. Toothache was rubbed with honey or willow bark paste. Poultices of figs or willow were common, as were herbal teas. Effectiveness is unclear, but the persistence suggests trial and error. One papyrus even offers a contraceptive recipe with honey, acacia, and lint. The Kahun papyrus also lists pessaries of honey and acacia gum. Acacia ferments to lactic acid, which may have helped as a spermicide. Other recipes used crocodile dung, which we can all agree was a bad idea. Linen cloths managed menstruation, which were cleaned with fig sap as a bleach. Childbirth scenes show women squatting on 2 bricks, supported by a midwife. A simple setup that made delivery a little easier. And after soap and perfume, the next step was weaving the clothes everyone wore. Egypt's climate was perfect for flax. Women spun flax into thread with drop spindles. Cloth was woven on upright looms. After weaving, it was soaked in the Nile, dried in the sun, and bleached bright white. Pleated dresses were stiffened with starch or resin, then pressed into shape with heat and weight. Some texts even mention mud garlic seed gum, such as starch. As for leather, it was tanned with oils and tannins from plants like pomegranate and acacia. Sandals and jars show how they oiled leather to stop it cracking. Pigments from plants and insects gave color. Animal fat made leather waterproof. When leather broke, they patched it with more leather or stitched it with sinew. Some sandals were even pegged back together with wood. Every house kept scraps of reed, linen, or leather for repairs. Needles of copper or bone, and thread handled mending. Pots and furniture were fixed with bitumen or animal glue. Frayed cords were twisted back together. Broken wood joints were pegged with dowels. Nothing was wasted. But of course, clothes could only do so much against Egypt's heat. Mud brick houses had thick walls that trapped cool air. Roofs were palm trunks covered with reed mats. In summer, families slept on the flat roofs for the breeze. High ceilings and tiny windows kept the sun out. Walls were whitewashed to bounce heat away. Courtyards and shafts let air circulate. Light came from oil lamps with papyrus or reed wicks. They burned animal fat or sesame oil. Oil was strained and reused to save fuel. Some houses set reflectors behind lamps to spread the light. Bedrooms were smoked with frankincense or myrrh to keep insects out. Flies and mosquitoes were chased off with citron leaves. Fine linen nets hung over beds. Smoke from burning plants helped guard food stores. Cats and ichneumons prowled granaries for mice. Egyptians didn't invent bug spray, but they came close. And while the walls stayed cool, tools had to stay sharp. Copper and bronze tools were kept sharp on sandstone whetstones. Archaeologists even find metal flakes worn down from sharpening. Metalworkers sometimes quenched hot copper in wine or oil to harden it. Maybe that's why the wine always ran out. Woodworkers kept blades oiled to ward off rust. Ropes were twisted from papyrus or grass. The fibers were wet first, so they would tighten as they dried. Builders measured distance with knotted ropes, each knot 1 cubit. They also used cubit rods of wood or stone as official standards. For leveling, a bowl of water with pegs worked as an early spirit level. Heavy loads were dragged on sledges. Workers poured water on the sand ahead of the sled to make it easier. Tomb paintings show this trick in action around 1900 BC. Logs or rollers were rare in the desert. So instead, teams of oxen and ropes did the job, and as for time, it was marked by the sun and stars. Obelisks and sundials tracked daylight hours, and at night, rising stars and merkets told the hours. Scribes had a simple toolkit. They used black soot ink for text and red ochre ink for headings. Pallets held 2 ink wells and slots for reed pens. Pens were split reed stems that held ink like quills. After writing, they wiped brushes on a stone slab. Some slabs were labeled scraps, proving even scribes recycled. Still, none of this mattered without farming. Egypt lived and died by the Nile. The Nile's flood was trapped in rectangular basins for planting. Priests read flood levels from nilometers carved into temple pillars. Crops were rotated. Cereals, flax and legumes in rich black land, and grazing in white land. After harvest, straw and chaff dried on rooftops. It would later be used for fodder or bedding. From the Middle Kingdom, farmers used the shaduf. It was a pole with a counterweight and a bucket to lift canal water. It was simple, but it worked. Floods were managed with bunds to trap or redirect water. Too little water meant famine. Too much meant chaos. Officials tracked flood heights and even adjusted taxes to match. And away from the Nile's safety, survival was never guaranteed. Travelers carried water in animal skins lined with oil or pitch. Clay jars with waxed stoppers worked too, though they were heavier. Itineraries scratched on ostraca stressed knowing the next well. Stone cairns marked distances, leaving a breadcrumb trail in the sand. At night, they used a merket and plumb line for direction. The North Star, then, was Thuban in Draco, not Polaris. By day, they watched shadow lengths on a stick to stay on course. As for first aid, it was simple but sharp. Honey or wine cleaned wounds. Lint sealed them. Soldiers' kits held bandages, honey pots, and even suturing tools. Yes, linen stitches in the desert. This is field surgery, Egyptian style. Yet, the same people who braved deserts also mastered crafts at home. Faience was made from crushed quartz, natron, and copper color. The paste was molded, fired, and glazed itself as it baked. Old shards weren't wasted, for they were ground back into new glazes. Pottery was tempered with silt or sand. Surfaces were polished smoothly with stones. Red or white slips gave color. Kilns were insulated with sand and ash to save fuel. Broken pots lived on as drainage tiles or tools. Now, when it came to carpentry, woodworkers used tenons, lap joints, and resin glue. For long beams, they scarfed joints together, tied with leather. Even locks existed. Sliding pin tumbler designs in wood. The oldest one found is from Beni Hassan, from around 1900 BC. So yes, ancient Egyptians already had locked chests. No spare keys, though. Meanwhile, daily life also had to do with managing people. Egyptians kept accounts on broken pottery and papyrus. Letters like those of Hekanakht show family budgets in the 20th century BC. They listed monthly rations of grain and oil for each household member. At Deir el-Medina, workers were paid in bread and beer vouchers. These acted like pay slips making sure no one cheated the system. Scribes often rounded numbers up or down, because math is easier when you don't care about decimals. Large projects ran on organized labor. Teams rotated every 10 days, giving workers a built-in rest cycle. When rations ran short, neighbors stepped in. Gifts and loans, written on ostraca, worked as an informal safety net. This kind of mutual aid kept the workforce stable. Petitions, however, had their own rules. Writers opened and closed with flattery, hoping to sway judges. Many began with the standard offering formula: "I offer to the king." People believed it boosted their odds, like slipping in the right password. As for the old myth, no. Egyptians didn't bury animals alive as offerings. Instead, animals like ibises were carefully mummified and dedicated. And in the end, it wasn't only kings or temples that held Egypt together. It was the daily work of ordinary people, their food, their trade, and their quiet routines. Those simple acts built the foundation of a civilization that lasted for thousands of years.